A seam across the back of his uniform trousers gave way. It was the winter of 1943, and Horst von Oppenfeld, then 30, a German officer captured that May in Tunisia, stood in a barracks at Camp Concordia, Kansas, holding the split cloth. The trousers he had worn across the desert and then the Atlantic no longer closed behind him. With a borrowed needle, he stitched into the opening a wedge of American cloth that never quite matched the shade. These men were prisoners of a country they had been told was starving, and they were outgrowing their own uniforms. The patch had a name, 3 words, and they hold the whole story of the war. Oppenfeld was a landowner's son from Pomerania who had spent years apprenticed on his parents' farm before the army took him. By May 1943, he was a staff officer of the 10th Panzer Division in Tunisia, and the division was finished. No food, no petrol, waiting to be collected. Their commander would later claim his men had fought to the end with knives. The officers who were there remembered it differently. It was Lieutenant Wolf-Dieter Zander, 27 and fluent in English, who radioed the British and worked out the surrender for the entire division. Oppenfeld, who had been aide to Colonel von Stauffenberg in Africa, drove their commander toward the British lines at Cap Bon, while the commander waved a makeshift white flag. The British, looking at men who had walked 50 kilometers in desert heat, let the prisoners drive to the camp in their own vehicles and handed out tea and crackers to 100,000 of them. He crossed the Atlantic carrying what he had been told for years about the country waiting on the other side, that America was out of fuel, that its workers lived in slums, that it could not feed itself. He came up on deck in time to see the Statue of Liberty. The train ran from New York to Kansas, and for days the enemy's country went past the glass. Somewhere in Ohio, the men decided they were passing Akron, and everyone craned to see the rubber factories. What stopped them was not the factories, it was the parking lots. Ordinary laborers were arriving for a morning shift in big cars, and there were thousands of cars standing in rows outside the plants, in a country whose newspapers had told them there was no fuel left to drive on. One of the prisoners, a Nazi, announced that the Americans had parked them there on purpose to impress the Germans. As Oppenfeld put it, he did not fool many of them. That was where the propaganda died, not in an argument, not in a lecture, at a train window in front of a parking lot. When they stepped down at Concordia, Kansas, a town chosen precisely because it was nowhere, the whole town was standing on the platform to look at them. What he noticed was the faces. Red-cheeked, healthy, well-fed farmers. The camp stood on open prairie, barbed wire, guard towers, 2 compounds, eventually about 1,700 officers and 600 enlisted men. 4 to a room, with a stove and enough coal. One rule produced everything that followed. Prisoners had to be fed the same rations as the troops guarding them, and America was not short of food. Oppenfeld listed what came back onto his plate, things he had not seen since the war began: citrus, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, raisins, milk, butter, meat, fruit juice. There was a second reason the men of the Afrika Korps changed shape on that prairie, and it is the quiet joke underneath the whole story. Enlisted prisoners went out to work the fields. Officers, under the Geneva Convention, could not lawfully be made to work at all. So men like Oppenfeld sat still and ate. Bodies that had crossed a desert on half rations began to fill out week after week in a barracks in Kansas. Then the trousers split. There was no German cloth in Kansas to mend them with, so the prisoners cut wedges out of American uniforms and sewed them into their own. The shade never matched. Their rears, Oppenfeld said, made for a funny sight. And they gave the patches a name. They called them the Victory Wedge. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. The joke was made by men who were still, officially, soldiers of a country that was losing, and who had chosen to carry a piece of the enemy sewn into their uniform and to call it a victory. The camp around them had not softened. It was still run by Nazi officers. Reading an American newspaper was dangerous. Real opinions stayed inside the 4 walls of one room. And the farm in eastern Germany, where Oppenfeld had done his apprenticeship, was already in Soviet hands, which meant the only trade he had was worth nothing. He signed up for the classes the prisoners were running inside the wire. By 1947, he was back in Germany, working in Berlin for the Ministry of Food and Agriculture under the American occupation, and the country he had come home to was starving. Average intake fell to around 1,000 calories a day. Old people wheeled barrows out to the countryside to buy potatoes. Families sold the last of the silver for bread. When Herbert Hoover toured Germany that year to assess the food supply, it was Oppenfeld who arranged the Berlin stops, and he made certain the former president was taken into a hospital ward to see what real hunger does to a body. 4 years earlier, his own uniform had split from American food. Now he was walking an American through wards of his own countrymen who could not get enough to think about the future. He went back to America in 1948 and studied agriculture at Cornell, and he spent the rest of his working life on other people's farmland. Reconstruction projects abroad, then 15 years at the World Bank. The farm boy whose own farm was gone. If you want more of these moments kept from being lost to time, subscribe. Leave a like if this one stayed with you, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from.